You owe me protection tax, Vic announced loudly enough for Marcus to hear from 30 feet away. That commissary money you got? Half comes to me every week, or we have problems. David's voice trembled. I don't have much. My family. Vic's fist connected with David's stomach. The young man doubled over, gasping. Find it, Vic said casually, walking away while David crumpled to the ground. Marcus noted everything. The timing, the location, the witnesses who immediately looked away. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated theater, designed to establish dominance while remaining officially invisible. The system had weaknesses, but those weaknesses were also strengths. They'd been carefully engineered over time. That evening, Marcus approached David in the library, one of the few spaces where conversations could happen naturally. You okay? He asked quietly. David looked up, eyes still watery with pain and shame. Why do you care? Because I've seen this pattern before, Marcus replied. Not here specifically, but in life. Bullies operate the same everywhere. They identify isolation and exploit it. So what am I supposed to do? David's voice carried hopeless anger. Fight back and get destroyed? Tell the guards and become a snitch? There's no winning. Marcus considered this. There's always another option, he said carefully. But it requires patience, trust, and understanding that real strength isn't about dominance. It's about disrupting the patterns that allow dominance to exist. David stared at him, confused but intrigued. Marcus continued. You're not alone anymore. That changes the equation fundamentally. It was a simple statement, but it represented a strategic shift that Vic Draven hadn't anticipated. The first move. Sometimes the most powerful action is the one nobody sees coming. Marcus was about to make a choice that would ripple through the entire block, and he did it without raising his voice or his fists. Keep reading. You're about to discover why true strength never announces itself. Marcus understood something fundamental about institutional power. It relied on atomization, on keeping individuals isolated and afraid. Vic's control existed because his victims never united, never saw themselves as anything more than separate targets. Breaking that isolation didn't require violence. It required deliberate connection. He began slowly, strategically. During meals, Marcus sat with different people each day, never in an obvious pattern, always appearing casual. He asked questions, listened genuinely, learned their stories. There was Roberto, a 50-year-old mechanic serving time for tax evasion, whose daughter was getting married next spring. There was Jerome, an artist who'd been caught with stolen property, who spent rec time sketching portraits for commissary items. Marcus never mentioned Vic directly. Instead, he talked about jiu-jitsu philosophy. My instructor taught me something interesting, he'd say casually. In grappling, the person who panics always loses. The person who stays calm, who breathes, who thinks strategically, they find opportunities invisible to everyone else. The conversations seemed innocuous, but they planted seeds. People began sitting together more intentionally. Small clusters formed during rec time, not large enough to appear threatening, but significant enough to create new social architecture. Vic noticed Marcus could see the bully's awareness sharpening, his predatory instincts recognizing a shift in the environment he controlled. But there was nothing obvious to confront. Marcus hadn't challenged him, hadn't recruited openly, hadn't violated any unwritten rules. 2 weeks after his arrival, Marcus made his first visible move. During lunch, Vic approached David again, clearly intending another shakedown. The young man stood alone at the trash area, vulnerable and exposed. But Marcus simply walked over and stood beside David, saying nothing. Just present. Within 30 seconds, Roberto joined them, striking up a conversation about basketball. Then Jerome arrived, discussing a portrait commission. Vic stopped 5 feet away, studying the group. His enforcers flanked him, waiting for direction. But there was no obvious challenge here, no direct confrontation. Just 4 men talking casually by the trash bins. To intervene would look arbitrary, would reveal the coercion underlying his power structure. After a long moment, Vic moved on, but his expression had shifted. For the first time, Marcus saw calculation replace certainty in the bully's eyes. That night, Tommy spoke carefully from his bunk. You know what you're doing is dangerous. Vic doesn't forget challenges. I'm not challenging him, Marcus replied truthfully. I'm simply being a friend to people who need one. The silent observer. A man walked into prison with nothing but the clothes on his back and a decade of martial arts training nobody knew about. Everyone expected him to become another victim. But what happened when the prison's most feared bully chose the wrong target? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you think you know about strength and survival. If this story resonates with you, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Marcus Chen entered Riverside Correctional Facility on a Tuesday morning in March. The processing officer barely glanced at him as she cataloged his belongings. One wallet, one watch, one wedding ring he'd never wear again. She saw what everyone else would see. A 42-year-old accountant with graying temples and reading glasses, convicted of white-collar fraud, unremarkable, vulnerable. The officer didn't know that Marcus had spent 20 years studying Brazilian jiu-jitsu under Master Hikaru in Sao Paulo. She couldn't see the countless hours he'd devoted to meditation, breathing control, and the philosophy of nonviolence that governed his life. His instructor's words echoed constantly. True mastery means never needing to prove yourself. Marcus's cellmate, Tommy, was a wiry man serving time for drug possession. Listen, Tommy whispered that first night. Stay away from Vic Draven. Big guy, shaved head, tattoo of a scorpion on his neck. He runs C-block picks someone new every few weeks. Makes their life hell until they either fight back and get sent to solitary, or break completely. Marcus nodded, filing the information away without emotion. He'd spent years learning to observe without judgment, to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. Prison was simply another environment, another test of discipline. The warning came too late. The next morning in the cafeteria, Vic Draven noticed him. The bully was exactly as Tommy described, 6'4", 250 pounds of muscle and menace. He moved through the room like a shark, his presence creating ripples of tension wherever he passed. Vic stopped at Marcus's table. Fresh meat, he announced to his three companions. Look at this one, probably crying himself to sleep already. He grabbed Marcus's breakfast tray and dumped it deliberately onto the floor, oatmeal splattered across the concrete. Laughter erupted from nearby tables. Marcus looked up slowly, meeting Vic's eyes with complete calm. He saw anger there, yes, but also something else. A desperate need for validation, for control in a world where he had none. Marcus recognized the pattern. Bullies were predictable. They fed on fear, on reaction, on the power they could extract from others' weakness. You going to do something about it? Vic demanded, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. Marcus smiled gently. No, he said quietly, but thank you for your attention. The response clearly confused Vic, who'd expected either cowering submission or foolish defiance. This calm acceptance was something new, something he didn't understand. That confusion would prove to be Marcus's first strategic advantage. The pattern emerges. When everyone else sees chaos, the trained observer sees patterns. Marcus began mapping the invisible architecture of prison life, and what he discovered would change everything. Stay with us. The next revelation will show you how awareness becomes the ultimate defense. Marcus spent his first week in careful observation. Each morning, he rose at 5:30, 30 minutes before the official wake-up call. In those quiet moments, he practiced his breathing exercises, moving through the meditation techniques that had sustained him through countless challenges. Tommy learned quickly not to interrupt, recognizing something in Marcus's stillness that commanded respect without demanding it. The prison operated on unwritten rules more powerful than any official regulation. Vic Draven controlled C-Block through a sophisticated system of intimidation and reward. He had 4 primary enforcers, men who'd aligned themselves with power because they believed it offered protection. Marcus watched how Vic selected his targets, always choosing someone isolated, someone without allies, someone who appeared weak. During recreation time, Marcus observed the surveillance system. Cameras covered most areas, their red lights blinking steadily. But there were blind spots, corners where the angles didn't quite reach, moments when the guards were distracted or understaffed. Vic knew these spaces intimately. That's where the real violence happened. Quick and brutal. Over before anyone official could respond. That is challenging him. His whole system depends on isolation. Marcus smiled in the darkness. Exactly. But there's no rule against friendship. No policy prohibiting conversation. No regulation limiting where we stand during lunch. He built his power in the gaps of official structure, so we'll build something different in those same gaps. Tommy was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You're either the smartest guy I've met or the craziest. Maybe both." Marcus agreed. The strategy was working, but he knew the real test was still coming. The escalation. When you disrupt a bully's system, they don't retreat, they escalate. Vic, Draven was about to reveal just how far he'd go to maintain control, and Marcus would face his first real test of nonviolent resistance. Don't miss this chapter. The stakes just became life or death. The confrontation came on a Wednesday afternoon during rec time. Marcus was walking the yard's perimeter, his usual meditation in motion, when Vic intercepted him with all 4 enforcers. They positioned themselves strategically, blocking casual observation while staying out of camera range. Marcus recognized the formation immediately. This was designed to look spontaneous while being carefully orchestrated. "We need to talk," Vic said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You've been busy making friends, acting like some kind of prison social worker. I don't remember giving you permission." Marcus stopped, maintaining his centered breathing. His body automatically assessed options. 4 vulnerable targets, predictable attack patterns based on their positioning, but he dismissed those thoughts immediately. Violence was the easy answer, the instinctive answer. It was also exactly what Vic wanted, what the system wanted. A fight would justify isolation, punishment, and reinforce the narrative that only aggression mattered. "I don't need permission to talk with people," Marcus replied calmly. "There's no rule against conversation." "There are my rules." Vic stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. "And you're breaking them. You're disrupting the natural order, making people forget their place." Marcus met his eyes with genuine curiosity. "What order? Everyone here is just doing time, trying to survive their sentence. Where's the threat in that?" The question seemed to confuse Vic momentarily. He'd expected fear or defiance, not philosophical inquiry. One of his enforcers, a muscular man named Pike, moved forward. "Stop playing games. Either you back off, or we make you back off." Marcus noted the surveillance camera 30 feet away, currently pointing toward the basketball court. He observed the yard's natural flow, where people were positioned, who was watching without seeming to watch. Tommy stood near the weights, apparently focused on his workout but clearly monitoring the situation. Roberto and Jerome had paused their card game, ready to intervene if needed, not with violence, but with presence. "I'm not playing games," Marcus said quietly. "I'm just being myself. If that threatens you, perhaps the question isn't what I'm doing wrong, but what you're protecting that's so fragile." Vic's face darkened. His hand shot out, grabbing Marcus's shirt and pulling him forward. "You think you're smart? You think your words protect you? I can end you right now, one word, and you disappear." Marcus didn't resist the grip, didn't tense. Instead, he used an ancient jujitsu principle, accepting the force rather than opposing it. His body relaxed completely, becoming heavy in Vic's grasp, making the aggressive hold suddenly awkward and effortful. "You could," Marcus acknowledged. "But then what? You prove you can hurt someone weaker. Everyone already knows that. What they're starting to see is that fear isn't the only option. Connection is an alternative. Mutual respect is possible. You'd have to eliminate everyone I've talked with to stop that idea now." For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tableau. Vic's enforcers watched uncertainly, recognizing that something unexpected was happening. Their leader had physical control, but somehow the advantage wasn't his. Finally, Vic released him with a shove. "This isn't over." "It never had to begin," Marcus replied. As Vic walked away, Marcus noticed something crucial. Several inmates had quietly moved closer during the confrontation, not intervening, but bearing witness. The isolation Vic relied on was cracking. People were starting to believe that solidarity might offer protection that submission never could. That night, Marcus meditated on the encounter. He'd passed one test, but he knew Vic would escalate further. The next move would be more dangerous, more calculated. He was right. The unexpected ally. Just when Marcus thought he understood the prison's power dynamics, someone stepped forward with information that would change everything. But help came from the last person he expected, and with a price he couldn't predict. Keep reading to discover how one secret conversation would expose the entire system. The library became Marcus's refuge. Between its shelves, conversations could happen without obvious surveillance, and the space attracted inmates seeking something beyond the yard's aggressive posturing. He was reviewing a book on Eastern philosophy when Officer Sarah Reeves approached his table. Officer Reeves was a 15-year veteran, mid-40s, with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to navigate prison politics without getting consumed by them. She wasn't part of Vic's system, but she wasn't actively opposing it either. At least, that's what Marcus had assumed. "Mr. Chen," she said formally, "I need you to follow proper library procedures. Books should be returned to their designated sections." She placed a different book on his table, one he hadn't selected, then walked away without waiting for a response. Marcus understood immediately. He waited 5 minutes, then opened the book she'd left. Inside, folded between pages, was a handwritten note. Security office. 3 p.m. Thursday. Maintenance shift change. 5 minutes only. The message raised questions. Was this a trap? An opportunity? Officer Reeves had always been professional but distant. What had changed? Marcus spent the evening evaluating risks, and by morning, he'd decided. Sometimes you had to trust the unexpected opening. Thursday at 3 o'clock, Marcus approached the security office with a maintenance request form, a legitimate excuse he'd prepared. The hallways were temporarily empty during shift change, exactly as the note had indicated. Officer Reeves was alone, reviewing camera feeds. "Come in quickly," she said without looking up. "We have 4 minutes." Marcus entered, noting her tension. "You're taking a significant risk. So are you. Every day." She finally met his eyes. "I've watched you, Chen. Watched how you've been operating. You're trying to dismantle Vic's control structure without violence, without official intervention. It's remarkable. But you don't know the full picture. Tell me." She pulled up archived footage on her monitor. "Vic Draven has been running C-Block for 3 years. In that time, there have been 17 violent incidents officially reported. But the real number is closer to 60. Most victims never file reports because they know retaliation would be worse than the original attack." Marcus studied the screen, seeing the familiar blind spots he'd already mapped. "The guards know?" "Some don't care. Some are afraid. Some—" She paused. "Some have arrangements with Vic. He provides information, keeps certain types of violence down, maintains order through fear. It's ugly, but from an administrative perspective, it's effective. Less paperwork, fewer lawsuits. A stable, if brutal, equilibrium." "So why tell me?" Officer Reeves's expression hardened. "Because I joined this profession to rehabilitate people, not to watch them be systematically traumatized. And because you're the first person in years who might actually change things, but you need to know what you're up against. The system isn't just Vic. It's institutional inertia, guard complicity, and administrative convenience all working together." She pulled out a flash drive. "This contains footage from the past 6 months, every blind spot, every incident, every pattern. I've been documenting it because I knew eventually someone would need this evidence, but I can't use it officially without destroying my career and possibly putting my family at risk. If it comes from an inmate complaint with supporting witnesses, though, that's different. That's actionable." Marcus understood the implications immediately. "You're giving me the ammunition to expose the entire system, but it requires people willing to testify, to stand against Vic publicly. That's dangerous." "Everything you're doing is dangerous," she replied, "but it's also working. I've seen the social patterns changing. People are connecting differently, sitting together, talking more openly. You've created the foundation. This evidence could be the catalyst." She handed him the drive. 3 minutes left. "One more thing. Vic knows something is shifting. He's planning something significant. I don't know what yet. but his communications with his enforcers have increased. Watch yourself. Marcus pocketed the drive. Thank you. This matters more than you know. Just make it count, she said. And Chen, whatever happens next, I never gave you that drive. Understood? Understood. As he left, Marcus felt the weight of new responsibility. He now possessed evidence that could bring down Vic's system entirely, but using it would require perfect timing, complete solidarity, and a courage he couldn't demand from others. The next move would determine everything. The setup. Vic Draven was preparing his endgame, and Marcus had less time than he thought. When the bully finally made his move, it would happen in the one place nobody could witness, and the stakes would be Marcus's life. Stay with this story. You're about to see how preparation meets opportunity in the most dangerous way possible. Marcus spent Friday evening reviewing Officer Reeves's footage on a contraband phone he'd borrowed from Jerome, who'd smuggled it in through visitation. The recordings were damning. Clear evidence of assaults, extortion, and systematic intimidation, all occurring in surveillance blind spots while guards conveniently looked elsewhere. 3 guards appeared repeatedly in the footage, always conveniently absent during incidents. The conspiracy was deeper than Marcus had initially understood, but evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed witnesses willing to come forward publicly, risking retaliation. And he needed timing, a moment when exposure would matter, when the system couldn't simply absorb the revelation and continue unchanged. Tommy noticed his intense focus. Whatever you're planning, it's about to get complicated. Word is that Vic's calling in favors. Something big is coming down tomorrow during laundry rotation. Laundry detail was perfect for ambush. The facility's basement laundry room had minimal supervision, steam obscuring sightlines, and noise from industrial machines masking sounds. Guards typically stayed at the entrance, letting inmates handle the actual work. It was one of the prison's most vulnerable spaces. He's going to corner me there, Marcus said, not a question. Probably, and he won't be alone. Pike and the others will make sure it looks like an accident. Industrial equipment is dangerous. Prisoners get hurt. Nobody asks too many questions. Marcus nodded slowly, thinking through scenarios. Violence remained the easy answer. He could neutralize Vic and his enforcers quickly with his training, but that would prove nothing except that he could fight. It would change the players without changing the game. Someone else would eventually fill Vic's role, and the system would continue. Unless Marcus could use Vic's aggression against him. Turn the moment of attack into the moment of exposure. He called an informal meeting in the chapel Saturday morning, one of the few spaces offering relative privacy. 15 men gathered, everyone he'd connected with over the past weeks. David, Roberto, Jerome, Tommy, and others whose trust he'd earned through consistent, genuine presence. Tomorrow, Vic is going to make his move, Marcus explained. He's going to try to hurt me badly enough to either break me or force me into violent response. Either outcome reinforces his control. But I have a different plan, and it requires all of you. He laid out the strategy carefully. It wasn't complicated, but it required coordination and courage. Some would document with contraband phones. Others would position themselves as witnesses. A few would alert specific guards at precise moments. The goal was to force Vic's violence into visibility, to make the invisible visible, to create a moment that couldn't be ignored or explained away. This is dangerous for everyone, Marcus acknowledged. Retaliation is real, but right now, we have evidence of systematic abuse and a chance to expose it in a way that demands action. We can continue surviving in Vic's system, or we can try to dismantle it. I can't make this choice for you. Roberto spoke first. I've got 8 months left. I was planning to keep my head down, do my time quietly. But my daughter's wedding is next spring, and I need to walk her down that aisle if I leave here without standing up when it mattered. I don't know if I can look her in the eye. Others nodded. David added, Vic already made me a target. Hiding didn't help. Maybe being visible is the real protection. One by one, they committed. Not because Marcus had convinced them with rhetoric, but because he'd shown them a different possibility through consistent action. Trust had been built incrementally, connection by connection. That afternoon, Marcus meditated longer than usual. He visualized tomorrow's confrontation, mentally rehearsing responses, maintaining his center regardless of circumstances. His instructor's voice echoed. The highest level of martial arts is never needing to fight. But when fight becomes unavoidable, victory comes from complete presence and absolute calm. Tomorrow would test whether wisdom could triumph over violence, whether solidarity could overcome intimidation, whether systems built on fear could be dismantled through courage. Marcus slept deeply that night, knowing he'd prepared as thoroughly as possible. The morning would determine everything, the confrontation. The moment had arrived. In the laundry room's steam and noise, Vic made his move. But this time, the bully was the one being watched. What happened next would ripple through the entire prison system. This is the chapter you've been waiting for. Watch how true strength reveals itself in the darkest moment. Sunday morning laundry rotation began at 8 o'clock. Marcus arrived with his assigned group, carrying his bag of clothes like any other inmate. The basement facility was exactly as described: hot, loud, filled with industrial washers and dryers creating constant noise and obscuring visibility. 2 guards stood at the entrance, 30 feet from the actual work area. Standard protocol. Vic and his 4 enforcers were already there, having volunteered for laundry duty specifically for this purpose. Marcus saw the calculation in their positioning. Pike near the industrial dryers, 2 others blocking exit routes, Vic approaching from the front. It was a well-designed trap. "Chen!" Vic called out over the machine noise. "Time we finished our conversation." Marcus set down his laundry bag calmly, his breathing steady despite his elevated heart rate. Behind Vic, he noticed Roberto entering with another group, phone discreetly positioned. Jerome was stationed near the guard entrance. David stood by the sorting tables, appearing to work while actually documenting everything was in position. "I'm just here to do laundry," Marcus said evenly. "Same as everyone else." "That's where you're wrong." Vic moved closer, his enforcers tightening the circle. "You're here to learn respect, to understand how things work. And if you're lucky, you'll walk out of here, eventually." Pike cracked his knuckles meaningfully. The threat was explicit now, no longer hidden behind words. Marcus remained centered, his mind clear. He could see the attack patterns forming. Pike would come from the left, another enforcer from the right, pinning him while Vic delivered the real damage. It was clumsy, relying on numbers and intimidation rather than skill. He could neutralize all of them in under 30 seconds using basic jujitsu principles. But that wasn't the goal. "Before you do whatever you're planning," Marcus said clearly, projecting his voice to carry beyond their immediate circle, "I want you to know something. I don't fear you. I never have. And that's not because I think I can beat you in a fight. It's because I've learned that real power doesn't come from making others afraid. It comes from connection, from respect, from standing together." "Spare me the philosophy lesson," Vic snarled. "Pike, hold him." Pike lunged forward, and Marcus made his choice. Instead of executing the joint lock that would have dropped Pike instantly, Marcus simply stepped aside, using minimal movement to let Pike's momentum carry him past. The enforcer stumbled into a laundry cart, creating noise and visible commotion. The second enforcer grabbed Marcus from behind in a crude chokehold. Again, Marcus could have easily escaped. A simple grip break, a basic hip throw. Instead, he went partially to his knees, making the struggle loud and visible, while controlling his breathing to avoid actual danger. He needed this to look threatening, to appear violent, but to remain survivable. Vic threw the first punch, a wild haymaker that Marcus could have evaded completely. Instead, he rolled with it, letting it connect with his shoulder rather than his face, the impact spinning him sideways against a washing machine with a loud metallic crash. "Stop!" A voice suddenly echoed through the laundry room. Officer Reeves appeared at the entrance, flanked by 2 other guards. "Everyone freeze! Hands where I can see them!" Vic's expression shifted from confidence to confusion, to calculation in rapid succession. "Officer, I saw what you were doing." Officer Reeves cut him off. "And so did the new cameras we installed yesterday in this room, specifically because of reported incidents." It was a bluff. There were no new cameras. But Vic didn't know that, and his moment of hesitation was enough. Marcus rose slowly, checking his shoulder dramatically while actually completely fine. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about assault, and I believe several witnesses saw what happened here." Roberto stepped forward. "I saw it unprovoked attack. David added. I recorded it. He held up his phone. Jerome. I witnessed the whole thing. One by one, inmates stepped forward. Not just those Marcus had organized, but others who'd been watching, who'd reached their own breaking point with Vic's system. The solidarity Marcus had been building became suddenly, powerfully visible. Vic's face darkened as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His system relied on isolation, silence, and fear. Marcus had turned all three against him. Officer Reeves moved forward with handcuffs. Draven, you're going to segregation pending investigation. Pike, you too. The rest of you, hands behind your backs. As they were led away, Vic locked eyes with Marcus one final time. There was rage there, yes, but also something else. A grudging acknowledgement that he'd been beaten by a strategy he'd never anticipated. Marcus had won without winning, had fought without fighting, had dismantled power through its own mechanics. The real work, though, was just beginning. The aftermath. The confrontation was over, but the story was just beginning. When the warden reviewed the evidence, the entire institution would face a reckoning it couldn't ignore. Don't stop now. Discover how one person's courage created waves that transformed everything. The investigation began within hours. Marcus sat in a small interview room with Officer Reeves, a prison administrator named Dr. Patricia Harmon, and a state corrections investigator. On the table between them lay David's phone footage, witness statements from 12 inmates, and the flash drive containing 6 months of documented abuse. Dr. Harmon, a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, reviewed the evidence methodically. She watched the laundry room footage 3 times, cross-referenced it with written statements, then finally looked directly at Marcus. This is comprehensive, she said carefully. Too comprehensive to have been assembled overnight. You've been documenting Draven's behavior systematically. Why didn't you report this through official channels? Marcus chose his words precisely. Because official channels rely on individuals reporting in isolation, making themselves targets for retaliation. The system inadvertently protects the predator by requiring vulnerable witnesses. I needed to create conditions where people felt safe coming forward together. That's a sophisticated analysis for someone serving time for financial fraud. Fraud happened because I got desperate and made terrible choices, Marcus replied honestly. But before that, I spent 20 years studying conflict resolution through martial arts. The principles apply universally, whether on a training mat or in institutional settings. The investigator, a younger man named Thomas Brennan, leaned forward. Let's be clear about what we're seeing here. This evidence suggests not just individual misconduct by Draven, but systemic failure guards who ignored violence, administrative structures that enabled abuse, an entire unofficial power hierarchy operating parallel to official rules. If we act on this, it's not just Draven who faces consequences. I understand, Marcus said, but continuing to ignore it means the next person in Vic's position will simply recreate the same system. The problem isn't individual bullies. It's the conditions that allow bullying to flourish unchallenged. Dr. Harmon exchanged glances with Officer Reeves, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. I agree. But understand, Mr. Chen, this will create significant disruption. Investigations take time. Draven will be in segregation, yes, but his associates remain. There may be retaliation attempts, and systemically, we'll need to restructure supervision protocols, reassign staff, potentially face external oversight. You've initiated something much larger than you might have intended. I intended exactly this, Marcus replied quietly. I intended to demonstrate that solidarity can overcome intimidation, that speaking truth together is safer than suffering silence separately, and that systems built on fear can be dismantled through courage. Over the following week, the investigation expanded rapidly. 3 guards were suspended pending review. Vic Draven and his primary enforcers faced additional charges, extending their sentences significantly. More importantly, Dr. Harmon implemented immediate policy changes. Increased supervision in identified blind spots, mandatory reporting training for all staff, and creation of an anonymous witness protection system that allowed collective reporting rather than isolated testimony. The transformation in C-Block was palpable. Conversations happened more openly. Inmates moved with less tension, less constant vigilance. The artificial hierarchy Vic had maintained collapsed without his presence to enforce it, replaced by something more organic. Small groups forming around shared interests rather than survival necessity. Tommy observed one evening. You know what's weird? The guards are actually nervous now. Used to be inmates were scared of guards and Vic. Now the guards know they're being watched too. Whole power dynamic shifted. Marcus nodded. Accountability works in all directions. That's what makes it powerful. No one is above observation when the community decides to pay attention together. Roberto stopped by Marcus's cell with news. My daughter called. The wedding is confirmed for April. I'm getting out in 6 months, and I'll actually be proud to walk her down that aisle. Now I did something that mattered here. Something good. These small victories accumulated. David enrolled in education classes. No longer paralyzed by constant fear, Jerome's artwork began appearing on the common room walls, officially sanctioned now. Men who'd spent years in survival mode started thinking about rehabilitation, about the lives waiting for them outside. But Marcus knew his own situation remained complicated. He'd challenged not just Vic, but the underlying system, making himself simultaneously respected and potentially problematic for institutional authority. His sentence wasn't over. The question remained. What would happen to someone who'd proven that inmates could organize effective resistance to injustice? The answer came from an unexpected direction, and it would test Marcus's principles one final time, the choice. Just when Marcus thought his work was complete, the warden made an offer that would challenge everything he believed about justice and second chances. His decision would define not just his own future, but the legacy of everything he'd built. Stay with us. This penultimate chapter reveals the true cost of standing up for what's right. Warden Michael Torres requested Marcus's presence on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after Vic's removal. Torres was a career corrections professional in his early 60s, known for running efficient facilities without being particularly innovative. He'd been warden at Riverside for 7 years, maintaining stability through conventional management approaches. His office reflected that philosophy, functional, organized, decorated with certificates and official photographs but lacking personal touches. Torres gestured for Marcus to sit, studying him with the assessing gaze of someone trying to solve a complicated problem. Mr. Chen, I'll be direct. What you accomplished here is remarkable. You identified a systemic problem, organized a collective response, provided documentation that forced us to act, and did all of it without violating a single prison regulation. It's impressive. It's also deeply problematic. Marcus remained quiet, waiting for the warden to continue. Problematic because you've demonstrated that inmates can organize effectively when properly motivated. You've shown that solidarity can challenge institutional authority. And you've proven that someone with training, intelligence, and strategic thinking can influence prison culture significantly. Torres leaned forward. Those are all skills that make you valuable, and potentially dangerous depending on application. I was trying to stop violence, not create it, Marcus replied carefully. I understand that. Dr. Harmon understands that. The state investigator understands that. But precedent matters in corrections. We can't have every inmate with leadership capability deciding to reorganize power structures according to their personal philosophy, however well-intentioned. It creates unpredictability. So what happens now? Torres pulled out a file. You have 18 months remaining on your sentence standard completion with good behavior. You'll serve another 14 months. That's the default path. He paused. However, I have discretion in certain circumstances. I can recommend you for immediate transfer to a minimum security facility, followed by accelerated release into a supervised rehabilitation program. You'd be out in 6 months, under strict monitoring but essentially free. Marcus absorbed this carefully. In exchange for what? In exchange for your cooperation with our systematic reform efforts. We need someone who understands both inmate culture and organizational dynamics to help us redesign supervision protocols, create better reporting systems, train staff on identifying problematic power structures. You'd be a consultant essentially, helping us prevent future Vic Dravens from emerging. It was a generous offer. Freedom 6 months early, meaningful work, a chance to influence systemic change beyond just Riverside. Marcus should have felt grateful. Instead, he felt cautious. And the men here? The ones who stood with me, who risked retaliation to provide testimony? What happens to them? Torres's expression flickered with something. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. They continue their sentences under improved conditions. We're implementing the reforms regardless of your decision. Your participation would accelerate and improve the process. But it's not conditional for basic changes. But it is conditional for my early release. Yes, that's the nature of the offer. Marcus sat back, thinking through implications. This was a test, though perhaps Torres didn't fully realize it. The warden was offering him personal benefit in exchange for cooperation with the system that had enabled abuse. The reforms were real, yes, but so was the underlying message. Work within authority structures, leverage your skills for institutional benefit, and you'll be rewarded. It wasn't corruption exactly. It was something more subtle, the way systems absorb resistance by co-opting resistors, turning revolutionaries into reformers, channeling outside challenges into inside expertise. The men who'd stood with Marcus had no such offers. They'd face their full sentences, benefiting from improved conditions but remaining incarcerated while he walked free. Roberta would still wait 6 months for his daughter's wedding. David would still serve 3 more years. Jerome would continue creating art in a cell. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said finally, but I need to decline. Torres's eyebrows rose. You're turning down early release? Most inmates didn't organize collective action based on principles of solidarity and shared sacrifice. If I leave now, accepting special treatment for leadership, I'm teaching exactly the wrong lesson. I'm saying that standing up for justice is valuable only insofar as it benefits you personally. That's not the philosophy I've been demonstrating. That's remarkably idealistic. Some might say foolishly idealistic. Marcus smiled. My martial arts instructor taught me that integrity isn't convenient. It's not something you practice when it's easy. The real test is whether you maintain your principles when compromise is offered attractively. Torres studied him for a long moment. You realize you're choosing 14 more months in prison over 6 months to freedom, for principle. I'm choosing consistency. The men here trusted me because I demonstrated that I valued their dignity as much as my own comfort. Leaving early would betray that trust. And honestly, Warden, I still have work to do here. Real transformation takes time. 6 weeks isn't enough to ensure these changes become permanent culture, rather than temporary policy. The warden leaned back, a slight smile crossing his face. You know, Chen, in 30 years of corrections work, I've never had an inmate turn down early release. Most of my job involves managing people who'll do anything to shave time off their sentence. You're an anomaly. Or maybe I'm just someone who takes my own philosophy seriously. Perhaps. Torres closed the file. The offer remains open if you reconsider, but I suspect you won't. You're going to serve your full sentence, continue being a positive influence in C Block, and probably drive my staff crazy with your principled consistency. That sounds accurate. As Marcus returned to his cell, Tommy was waiting with questions. How'd it go? What did the warden want? Marcus explained the offer and his decision. Tommy stared at him incredulously. You turned down early release? Are you insane? Maybe. Or maybe I finally understand what my instructor meant about true mastery requiring absolute commitment to principle regardless of personal cost. That evening, word spread through C Block about Marcus's choice. The response surprised him. Respect deepened. Men who'd been watching cautiously now approached with genuine trust. His decision to stay, to refuse personal advantage, carried more weight than any words about solidarity ever could. Actions, as always, communicated truth more powerfully than rhetoric. The legacy. 14 months later, Marcus Chen walked out of Riverside Correctional Facility a free man. But the real story wasn't his departure. It was what he left behind, and what those he'd inspired would carry forward. This final chapter reveals the truth. Real change doesn't happen in moments, but in the countless small choices that follow. Marcus's last morning in prison began like hundreds before it. 5:30 wake-up, meditation, careful attention to breathing and center. But this morning carried different energy. His belongings were packed, paperwork completed, release scheduled for 9 o'clock. Tommy pretended to sleep, but was clearly awake, avoiding the sentimentality of goodbyes. You know, Tommy said finally, you're going to be gone by lunch, and this place is going to be boring as hell without you. Marcus smiled. You've got 4 months left. You'll manage fine. I'll manage because of what you taught us. About staying calm. About building connections. About the difference between reacting and responding. Tommy sat up. Question though, was it worth it? Staying the extra time, turning down early release, all of it? Marcus considered this seriously. Every single day. Not because I enjoyed being here, but because leaving early would have undermined everything we built together. Principles only matter when they cost you something. Otherwise, they're just convenient opinions. At breakfast, Marcus sat one final time with the group that had formed around those initial connections. Roberto, David, Jerome, and a dozen others who'd joined over the months. They'd created something rare in prison. Genuine community based on mutual respect rather than survival necessity or coerced hierarchy. Roberto spoke first. My daughter's wedding is next month. I get out in 2 weeks. You saved my life here, Marcus. Not physically, maybe, but you gave me back my dignity that matters more than you know. David added, I arrived here terrified, thinking I'd never survive 3 years. Now I'm halfway through, taking college classes, actually planning for a future. Because you showed me that strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing together. One by one, they shared reflections. Not about Marcus specifically, but about what they'd learned, how they'd changed, who they were becoming. The conversation wasn't sentimental, but substantive. Men discussing genuine transformation, acknowledging work still required, committing to carry forward the principles they'd practiced. Officer Reeves appeared at 9 o'clock. Chen, you're processed out. Time to go. As Marcus stood, the entire dining hall erupted in applause. Not loud, not theatrical, but sustained and genuine. Men who'd never spoken to him directly, who'd simply watched from distance, acknowledged what his presence had meant. The sound echoed off concrete walls, a moment of humanity in a place designed to warehouse human consequences. Walking through Riverside's gates felt surreal. 14 months of structured routine, controlled environment, limited choices, suddenly replaced by open air, unlimited possibilities, the profound responsibility of freedom. Marcus's wife, Jennifer, waited in the parking lot. Older now, but smiling with hope they'd both feared was lost. Their embrace lasted long minutes. No words necessary. Some experiences create chasms that only time and commitment can bridge. They'd stayed married through his incarceration, worked through anger and betrayal and shame, built toward reconciliation even when it seemed impossible. So, Jennifer said finally, what now? Now we rebuild, Marcus replied. One day at a time, with the same principles I practiced inside. Honesty, consistency, respect, and understanding that real change happens through accumulated small choices. 6 months later, Marcus received a letter from Dr. Harmon. The reforms at Riverside had continued expanding. Inmate-reported violence had decreased 40%. Educational program participation had tripled. 3 other state facilities were implementing similar oversight structures. The changes were becoming systematic, institutionalized, permanent. But the letter that meant most came from David, writing as he approached release. I thought prison would break me. Instead, it taught me that strength comes from standing together, that courage means supporting others even when afraid, and that systems only change when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Marcus framed that letter, hung it in his small apartment, not as monument to himself, but as reminder that influence happens through presence, through consistent modeling of principles, through the patient work of connection and solidarity. He'd returned to accounting work, doing bookkeeping for small businesses who'd give a convicted felon a second chance. The work was humble, the pay modest, but it was honest. Jennifer taught high school mathematics. Together they rebuilt financial stability, relationship trust, and cautious optimism about their future. But Marcus also volunteered, 2 evenings weekly at a re-entry program, helping released inmates navigate parole systems, job searches, and the profound challenge of reintegrating into society after incarceration. He taught meditation classes, shared jiu-jitsu philosophy, listened to stories of prison experience with the understanding of someone who'd lived it. And he talked about Riverside, about how solidarity dismantled oppression, about how 13 men standing together could accomplish what no individual could achieve alone, about how real strength meant protecting others, not dominating them. The transformation hadn't been dramatic, hadn't happened in one confrontation. It had emerged through hundreds of small choices: to sit with someone isolated, to ask genuine questions, to remain calm when provoked, to value principle over convenience, to demonstrate daily that different possibilities existed. That was the real lesson. Change didn't require superhuman capability or perfect strategy. It required ordinary people making extraordinary commitments to integrity, repeated consistently over time until new patterns replaced old systems. Marcus Chen hadn't defeated a prison bully through superior fighting skills. He'd dismantled an oppressive system through strategic solidarity, built on foundation of genuine connection and sustained by collective courage. And that legacy, the example of what becomes possible when individuals choose community over isolation, principles over expedience, courage over compliance, that legacy continued rippling outward, touching lives in ways Marcus would never fully know. Because the most powerful transformations aren't the ones we witness personally. They're the ones we inspire in others, who carry them forward into contexts we'll never see, creating change that outlasts our presence, proving that how we conduct ourselves in the darkest moments defines not just our character, but the possibilities we leave behind for everyone who follows. If this story moved you, inspired you, or changed how you think about strength and solidarity, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Real transformation happens when we stop waiting for heroes and start being the change our communities need. The question isn't whether one person can make a difference. It's whether you'll be that person when the moment arrives.